Okay. How did you know that? Excellent.
Have the icon.
All right, class 29, Golden Doves, class 29, Roman numeral 25, the fourth chapter. I'm going to just read first, and then I will have you read after me. The fourth chapter examines some of the textuological concepts of the rabbis. It's really important. For the rabbis, there were different levels of text. You know, it wasn't just literature. And the different levels of text had very precise demarcations. Read.
Okay, the fourth chapter examines some of the textuological concepts of the rabbis. Written and oral correspond to the legal status of contracts.
Right, that's really important because people say Torah shebe'al peh is because you said it by heart, which you did. Torah shebichtav because it was written down, which it was. But that misses the point. Among the Hachamim, a written contract has a different legal status than an oral contract. Like a milva al peh has a different legal status than a milva bichtav.
Certain contractual obligations are considered written, whether they are actually written or not, and others are considered oral, even when they are put down in writing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just about being be'al peh or bichtav. Okay? The fact is that, as the Gira Shiri Hagon says, the Hachamim did used to write down the Beraitot. Right? Oh, but I thought it's Torah shebe'al peh. They used to write it down. So what makes it written or oral is the legal status. So, for example, you can have a matenat shechiv merah. Matenat shechiv merah is a gift that a person gives on his deathbed, as he's about to die. It's called matenat shechiv merah. Now that matana, the Gemara says, is kichtuvim v'chimsulim damu. It has a status of a written matana, but it's oral. But here we see that something can have the status of a written, legal status of a written document, even though it's oral.
1 second. The principal difference between written and oral documents pertains to the institution of derasha.
So lemanaf kamina, whether something is oral or written, there's a few manaf kaminot. One of the kaminot is that the Bet Din only has the right to make a derasha, to interpret, that is, a written text, a written shetar. They can make a derasha on the written shetar.
So just, I know it's a little premature because we're probably going to get into this in the rest of the book. But if what is written isn't necessarily what is written, and what is oral isn't necessarily what is actually oral, right? As we would understand it just over on our first thought, what was the big deal with the publication of the Mishnah? Right? They say the and vice versa. So what is the big deal with the publication of the Mishnah? Why did they say about that? There's that famous passage regarding the writing of the Mishnah.
Rambam discusses this in the Moneh Nebuchim. He says that originally, the way the Torah shebe'al peh was supposed to work is there was not supposed to be a fixed formulation of the Torah shebe'al peh. The Torah shebe'al peh was subject to the teacher who is teaching, or moseh the Torah shebe'al peh to his talmidim. He had the right to formulate it and to organize the material as he wants to. It was up to the teacher to do it. And there was no set formulation or organization or any rule. I want to teach, I want to teach Masechet Kenim to my talmidim before. I want that to be the beginning. That's, if for some reason I see that, I could do Masechet Kenim for us, and then Masechet Berachot, and how I organize the halachot. It was all up to the Bet Din. I said the teacher, it's the Bet Din. Let me correct myself. What happened with Rabbeinu HaKadosh is, he took the Torah shebe'al peh and he organized it and set it forth in a fixed matbea, in a fixed formulation. That was earth-shattering. That was very important on the one hand because it saved Am Yisrael, but on the other hand, there were certain negative repercussions to that, right? There were certain negative repercussions to that. When the Mashiach comes and the Bet Din is reinstituted, we're going to go back to the way it used to be with Torah shebe'al peh, is by the Bet Din, nimsar to the next generation and organized as a Bet Din sees fit in its generation.
I think, if I may just add something quick on the matter, I think the main negative repercussion of the publication of the Mishnah seen today is in the
Just 1
fact
second. I
that,
have to walk Julie out. She's leaving.
pause it
No,
then,
but
just quickly
continue.
pause it. Okay,
Go ahead.
so I think one of the main negative repercussions of the publication of the Mishnah, and we see it especially today, is that they treat the Mishnah like it's a text, like it's the defining text of the Torah Shebe'al Peh, and that they study it that way. And if you Torah Shebe'al Peh, if you ask them, "Maze Torah Shebichtav?" A child in yeshiva somewhere in Israel, "Zeh Tana, Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim. Maze Torah Shebe'al Peh? Zeh Mishnah, Gemara." They don't view it the way it's supposed to be viewed. They view it like they would view, I don't know, I can't even.
Let me put it in a better way, because the Mishnayot is the Torah Shebe'al Peh, but the point is, it's a restatement of the Torah Shebe'al Peh. It's one possible restatement of the Torah Shebe'al Peh. It's not the only.
Not the exactly. That's the problem. They treat it like the Torah Shebichtav existed, the Torah Shebe'al Peh was in the air, and then it became formal, and that's it. And there was no Torah Shebe'al Peh, there was no Lei Mental going around. But there was always a Lei Mental. It's
Exactly.
not the Hachmei Talmud is a formulation of the Lei Mental of the time of the Rabbeinu and Rav Asher.
Right,
You know?
right. Now, let's also be fair now. What makes the Mishnayot special is that it was a formulation of the Torah Shebe'al Peh that was accepted by all the Chachamim. And
Yes.
then, and as we said, that had repercussions. The fact that we have that formulation.
Okay.
It's annoying. Go ahead.
Right. It will be seen that the right of the rabbis to apply the Rashat to the Torah corresponds to the right of the court to interpret secular documents, Shetrei Hediotot, surrendered to them by their legal holders.
Right. So once you moser a shetar to the Bet Din, a written shetar, the Bet Din has the right to interpret it and even to add things to the shetar as necessary for the interpretation. That's because it's a written document. Similarly, when we say that the Torah is katuv, Torah shebichtav, it means that they have the right to make derasha on the Pesukim in the Torah and to give it interpretations. I just have to walk Julie out because their carpool is finally here. All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So Shetrei Hediotot, surrendered by them, to them by their legal holders.
Right. Only a text that was written.
You want to maybe explain?
Oh yeah, I just did. So the same way, Shetrei Hediotot, there's a shetar, I don't know, I'm going to sell you 100 cups for $10. So that's the shetar. So you moser the shetar to the betin. Because the shetar is a written text, the betin has a right to interpret the shetar and even to perhaps make derasha and say, this word means that. When you said this word, you meant the other. That's derasha. What gives them the right to make the derasha is because it's masur to them. Similarly, when the Torah nimsera, the Torah shebichtav, nimsera to the Jewish people, to the Bet Din, therefore the Chachamim can make derasha on the Torah shebichtav.
Only a text that was written and published as a book, sefer, can be subject of derasha.
Right. It has to be physically written, but more important, it has to be masur. Right? And how do you moser the text to Am Yisrael, to the Chachamim? By publishing the text.
And in a certain sense, as Veda would always explain and say, in a certain sense, what defines a publication is what defines a book is published is the fact that the publisher surrenders the text to the public he is publishing the book for.
Yes, to the public. Excellent. That's right.
The authority to apply derasha is predicated on the surrendering of the work by the author. Okay.
Yes.
Here. In turn, each generation must surrender the text and pass it on to the next, thereby enabling the new generation to make its own derasha. Moshe קיבל תורה מסיני ומסרה ליהושע, ויהושע קיבל אותו ממשה ומסרה לזקנים, etc., etc.
Right.
Vertical transmission makes synchronic derasha possible.
Right. You moser the Torah shebichtav from one generation to the other, and then every generation in its time can make its own contemporary derashot on the text of the Torah.
This transmission must exclude the imposition of horizontal interpretation on the text on the next generation.
Right. We're mosrim the text, but the next generation can reject our derashot and make new derashot. So, for example, in the case of a din mufla, the din mufla is based upon the derasha. They can reject the derasha, and they can even change the din mufla if they wish to do so.
but just correct me if I'm wrong, a derasha rejected by generation B, a derasha of generation A that was rejected by generation B, still exists within the framework of the diachronic axis. Just because the synchronic axis decided that this derasha was rejected or whatever, or objected to, doesn't mean that it is outside the frame of this diachronic axis. No,
it's true. It's true, but it's of historical interest. But nevertheless, as a matter of law, not history, what's binding is how the Bet Din of that generation interprets the pasuk and says, now we want to make the following din mufla based on the following derasha.
But the reason that was important to me is because in Am Yisrael, we don't believe in erasing history. We don't believe in getting rid of what the Hachamim said because we disagree with it.
Absolutely correct.
I just heard somebody in the, I'm sorry to just small veer. I just heard somebody some American politician say that what they're going to do now is erase all of the wrongdoings that America did. By the way, the wrongdoings by their, by the way they see it. They think whatever's wrong is whatever they think is wrong. They want to erase that from the American history books. Get rid of it, like lo asinu et hadavarim ha'ele.
Right, lo hayu devarim me'olam. All right, listen, what mani there? That's them. Yeah, but exactly, we don't erase history. We don't rewrite history. We promulgate laws, and with the new generation comes new necessities, and therefore we change the laws, those laws that we can change, right? Based on derashot, yes.
As noted by Saussure, continuity necessarily implies change, varying degrees of shifts in the relationship between the signified and the signifier.
That's a very amok thing. You notice what he says? Continuity necessarily implies change, meaning we as a nation, why is it that we were able to exist for so long? We have continuity, we continue existing. It's precisely because through the mechanism of derasha, we can reinterpret the text. Again, it doesn't mean reinterpret the whole text, by the way. So we have the text is always there. But certain things, dinim mufla'im, that we may reinterpret and hence conform the law to the contemporary situation. And again, I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about the Oraita laws that we receive from Moshe Rabbeinu. I'm not talking about Kabbalah Moshe Sinai. Those are immutable. There is a part of the Torah that is immutable, of course. But then there are dinim mufla'im. And those dinim allow us continuity. Precisely because they change, we continue. So for us to continue as a nation, there has to be that dynamic aspect to the law.
Just as language comprises two levels, sharah and ma'na, which function somewhat as a pair of mirrors reflecting one another, oral literature too comprises two distinct genres. I continue?
Right, yes.
Haggada, like derasha, is concerned with the dissemination of the idea. Halacha is concerned with the articulation of the idea and its transmission in precise formulas.
Very interesting. So we have the two literary genre in the Torah Shebe'al Peh, Haggadah and Halacha. Halacha is precise formulations. Haggadah is the transmission of ideas. There's a difference between the transmission of ideas and the transmission of precise linguistic formulations. And we're going to discuss what that difference is. But that's why you have Halacha on one side and Haggadah on the other.
Again, Haggadah involves reflexive knowledge. The Mishnah, which is the authoritative body of Halacha, involves repetition and transmission to others.
Right, because in Haggadah, since it's the idea and not the linguistic text that you're worried about, you can reflect upon it and you can interact with the idea and you can bring the idea in a slightly different way, add to it. You can't do that in Halacha. You can't say, yes, according to Halacha, kafta in zakukla, but according to the Mekubalim, kafta zakukla. You can't say that. This is because here.
That was a good one. Even when I was told right after that by somebody that even according to the Mekubalim kafta, it's not true. But
it's true. I think I was talking. He was just rambling like many of the 40 Mekubalim.
No, it's Hazi.
But nevertheless,
it was probably whether kafta or lo kafta, he was patur, I think.
Right. Okay. So but the Mishnah is precise linguistic formulations which contain the law. You can't change those linguistic formulations. That's what halakha is by definition.
Right. Because the Torah is self-referential and free from any extraneous elements that either limit or condition it, the rabbis consider the Torah to be a shirah, song.
That's beautiful. Because the pasuk says, "Kitvu lachem et hashirah hazot," and it's referring to the Torah. It says, "V'lameda et bnei Yisrael simaha b'fihem." So that's a mitzvah of Ketivat Sefer Torah. So the mitzvah of Ketivat Sefer Torah, the Torah is referred to as a song. Why is it referred to as a song? And the answer is because it's self-referential. You don't need anything outside the Torah that somehow refers to the Torah to explain the Torah. The Torah is its own closed unit. So if you want to understand what a pasuk means one place, look at a pasuk in another place, and that pasuk in another place will refer to this pasuk and explain it. It's self-referential. So because if there was something outside the Torah that somehow conditioned the Torah, right, then you have extraneous things above the Torah that somehow tell you, no, this is what the pasuk means, and this is how to do the mitzvah. So you have, and among the modern acharonim, you have a lot of extraneous things outside the Torah that they superimpose onto the Torah, but it's not supposed to be like that. The Torah is self-referential.
Like
and
a
that's
poem.
Why it's a song. That's why it's a song or a poem.
But like a poem, the Torah is complete in itself and accounts for itself.
Right, because when you have a song or a poem, a beautiful if you need to refer to something outside the song to explain the song, it's not a song. The beauty of poetry is that each poetic unit exists independently. Abdei zeman, abdei avadim hem. Eved Adonai ulevad chofshi. Al ken bevakesh kol enosh chelko chelki Adonai amira nafshi. That's a beautiful, beautiful poem. I don't need to look at anything else. I don't need to look at Ibn Ezra, Rashi, Tosafot, Radak. The poem speaks for itself.
1 second. It will be seen that this self-referentiality is not an extension of the text itself. The Torah shebichtav, written law, but of the Torah shebe'al peh, oral law. As it were, sorry.
Yeah, so this self-referentiality is not an extension of the text of Torah shebichtav, but the Torah shebe'al peh. I'm not sure what he meant by this sentence. I think
I was going to ask, maybe
sorry?
The question I'm going to ask will help answer what this sentence is about. I was going to ask before that if the Torah is self-referential, then where is the Torah shebe'al peh? The Torah shebe'al peh is, in a sense, external to the Torah shebichtav. By the Torah by virtue of being bichtav, it is not the al peh, and thus the Torah shebe'al peh is, right?
I think what he meant when he says self-referential is precisely because we have the lay mental, which is part of the Torah. The Torah is divided into two parts. You have the written and you have the oral, right? Those are two inseparable parts. So precisely because you have the lay mental, which refers to the Torah and says ot means tefillin, but that's part of the Torah. So you see how the Torah is always self-referential. You can't divorce the lay mental from the written text, right? So you process the Torah shebichtav through the lay mental, through the Torah shebe'al peh, and therefore you need to go outside the Torah to explain the Torah. Meaning, don't tell me that in Ugaritic the word meant this and this, and therefore here is the correct meaning of the pasuk. No, believe it or not, the Jewish people spoke. We had a language. When I speak English now and I use words, don't tell me that the word I'm using in ancient, in the ancient Celtics, it meant this, and therefore what I really mean is that. No, I'm just speaking the language as I speak it. You can't go back in history and use the history as a way to condition the words. So the Torah is similarly self-referential. It's a language, it's a song. There's nothing outside the Torah that conditions what the Torah really means.
As it were, the curvature of the scroll of the Torah, allowing for self-referentiality, is the mental law determining the methodological horizon and textual logic of the text.
Right. So this Torah is round because it's a closed system. And it's a beautiful metaphor. So Jela says what makes the Torah round is the Torah Shebe'al Peh. The Torah Shebe'al Peh subsumes the Torah Shebichtav, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're in the Torah Shebichtav and inside, you look at the roundness, which is Torah Shebe'al Peh, that's as far as you need to go. There's nothing outside the universe. There is no multiverse in the Torah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
very nice. I think
right.
Bad.
Right, determining the methodological horizon. Now, the Torah Shebe'al Peh gives you the methodology. For example, Yag Midot Shatorah Nidreshet Bahem. That's methodology, how to make derashot, and the textual logic of the text, and how to analyze pesukim. Right, there's a certain internal logic, and it gives you that internal logic because it's always textual logic. There is no absolute Platonic logic like among the Greeks, but rather it's textual logic, right? Mm-hmm. So what's logical for a Hebrew-speaking Torah person is not necessarily logical for somebody else, but that's textual logical. And that comes to Hum Shabbat, yes. All right.